Check, check, 1, check, 1, 2. Check, check, 1, 2. Check, check, 1, check, 1, 2. Check, check, 3. Check, 3, 4. Check, 5. Can I get to 10? No? All right, sweet.
Welcome. I'm Gail Sassnett, Associate Director of the Bob Graham Center for Public Service, handling the public programs, and we're glad to see all of you here tonight. This is our third program this year and our last one in the Explore More series. After the talk, there'll be time for Q&A. We'll pull this microphone over here to the middle so that you can come up and ask your questions. And we do ask that you come to the microphone because we are streaming and recording and you won't be heard otherwise. Remind you to please silence your cell phones. And now Joseph Case, who is the editor of Explore magazine, is going to introduce the program and our speakers.
Well, thank you, Gail, and I want to welcome you to Explore More. So 3 times a year, we get to share the amazing research that is being conducted by UF faculty here on campus, around the state, and around the world. This time, I'm pleased to be joined by UF horticultural science professors Rob Furl, and Annalisa Paul. This issue of Explore was pretty well underway in January when we started to see pictures come back from Rob and Annalisa from Antarctica. And we knew that we just had to share this story with our readers. So we kind of blew up the whole magazine at the and reconfigured around this story. So we've been lucky. We've been following Rob and Annalisa's work for years. So now it's my pleasure to share some of their stories with you. So first, we have copies of this magazine in the back, and it's available online, this story at explore.research.ufl.edu. But let's start with, at first glance, there don't seem to be a lot of connections between space and plants in Antarctica. So can you kind of give us some background on how these topics kind of come together and how you found yourselves in Antarctica?
Sure. Well, so we are plant molecular biologists that work in a number of strange environments. One of them is spaceflight. And spaceflight's a novel environment that's outside the evolutionary experience of any kind of terrestrial organism. And we envision the idea of taking our plants not only to space, but eventually onto Mars. And so to do that, we have to make some connections of what it takes to grow plants here versus what it takes plants grow in transit. And then finally, if we were growing a greenhouse on Mars, what would it take to grow things there? So what's the connection to Antarctica is that in order to practice things like growing plants in a strange and novel environment, taking them to Antarctica is one way for us to practice a little bit and to test out some of our ideas and procedures.
One of the things that might sort of question or be a question in your mind or create some interest in you from sort of how did they get their perspective is that Annalisa is a plant biologist. I'm a molecular biologist. If you want to know about plants, ask Annalisa. If you want to know what's going on inside their cells or their nuclei, you can ask me, although she's giving me the eye there because she knows that stuff too. But the sort of the bottom is how 2 scientists can even get involved in this business at all is that combined we are interested in how things react to their environment. And spaceflight, as you can see in this slide for exploration, gives us the opportunity to look at basic questions about what it is to move life off from our planet. In other words, what would our life look like on another planet? And so you take somebody that looks inside of cells, you take somebody that understands environmental pressures on plants and put them in a place where they can explore a brand new environment. It really creates a lot of sort of intrinsic scientific query and interest. It's the kind of thing that can really drive us either crazy or crazy happy with the opportunity to see something that plants have never experienced before, and then try to understand what it takes for them to adapt to that environment. So among the things that NASA is interested in overall is basically, is life out there, and what are the limits of our life here, and where do those two things meet? So you may have heard some of these terms like astrobiology and exobiology, and those are all parts of the concept of how do we get an understanding of our role, human role, or our terrestrial life's role in the universe. We really get to ask those kind of questions.
So what's next? Where do we go from this, and why is it that plants are important to the equation? So everyone is pretty much familiar now with this movie, The Martian, and this is pictures taken from that with our friendly potato plant there in the corner. And how plants fit into this role of exploration is really quite profound. So when you think about it, plants are among the only things on the face of the earth that actually take in energy from outside the earth, and turn it into something that we can use, while at the whole time recycling the things that the animals don't use. So carbon dioxide that we breathe out goes in, wastewater goes into the plants, and they take everything they need from it. And as a consequence, they bring out oxygen that we can breathe, carbohydrates that we can eat, and clean water that runs just about pretty much the rest of the world. And this is important to think about it, because whether we're talking about growing things here on Earth or growing things elsewhere, this is part of the cycle. This is the loop that brings things together. And so if you think about the big picture of how plants fit into exploration, we do like to think about it as a loop. And what happens is that, again, you've got carbon dioxide, waste materials going in, and that then cycles out, that the plants use the things from that waste materials and turns it into everything else that we need. And if we're going to go elsewhere, we have to be able to not only bring a big picnic basket with us, but we have to be able to bring the biology with us that enables us to recapitulate some of the ecosystems that we are used to here. Right now, we don't have these kind of habitats. We don't have the kind of large-scale greenhouses in orbit that you might like to envision from science fiction. We don't have the kinds of things that we're really familiar with when we see in movies and things. But this is part of the stuff what makes us dream and thinks about how can we take our biology with us.
And one of the things that, if we keep on this theme for just a little bit more, that brings us back to the notion of why plants and why Antarctica, again captured by this movie, The Martian. How many scientists get to have Matt Damon as their avatar, right? So there's our guy there, and he, being us, shows you in that little ecosystem there is where he solves the problem of living off the surface of the earth beyond what they could take in their lunchbox. He figures out how to grow his own food and be there. So Joe, that's a little bit of the long way around to how plants fit into the scheme of exploration, and a little bit about how plants fit into spaceflight. We'll get into that in a little bit more. And certainly when we get to talking about Antarctica, we'll show you how it fits there. But eventually, so one of the big goals is captured by this piece of artwork by Carter Emmert from, at that time, the National Museum. There's a greenhouse on Mars, and there is sort of the big picture concept. The first colonists on Mars will be growing their own food in their Martian greenhouse, and they'll be living there and self-sustaining to a certain extent. So that's how plants fit into that big picture.
So for a lot of people, their idea of food in space is like Tang orange drink and the freeze-dried ice cream you get at the Kennedy Space Center. Why is it, that's how we've done it up until now, basically. So why are we moving into this next phase, or why do we need to move into this next phase?
Well, Annalisa caught the biggest part of that in an earlier comment, in that, for example, going to Mars is a multi-year endeavor. Right now, we don't know how to pack food that lasts 3 years, or to pack enough food to keep a crew alive for that period of time. Moreover, everything we have learned from people that are in space is that, well, they'll get a little bit tired of packaged food after a while.
So You often see anecdotally from astronauts when they'll talk to us, and they say that one of their favorite things to do is to work with plant experiments, for instance, not only because they smell nice, they look pretty, they don't have to deal with icky, but it's also a reminder of home. I mean, it's a morsel of home that is brought with them, that's living and breathing just like they are. And that's a really huge aspect of why astronauts like plants. But food-wise, there's another really important reason, and that is that you can get the fresh kind of nutrients. We can engineer different types of nutraceuticals into plants that will allow us to expand the repertoire of the kind of food that not only astronauts can supplement their diet with, but eventually growing greenhouses on Mars. So we always like to think about the future looking something like this lower right-hand corner picture, where you have an active growing system that supports colonists or astronauts for long-term on Mars. Right now, we're more like this. And this is a picture from the space station that probably many people have seen online. And this is a few astronauts who are actually consuming an experiment that was grown in this small habitat called veggie. But this was the highlight of their week, was being able to do this.
And one of the things you sort of, so we've been thinking, those science fiction movies, the concept of taking plants with us has been around for decades. But it wasn't until 2015, in the picture that you see up there, that American astronauts finally got to eat, legally, some of the stuff that they grew on the space station. The Russians have been eating their experiments for years, but that's sort of behind, on the other side of the space station or in the space station mirror. The American astronauts, in order to eat this lettuce that was grown in a special growth unit on the space station, had to go through a bunch of training on how to make sure that what they grew there wouldn't make them sick. Okay. In the end, it turns out if you grow it in space, it's absolutely more clean than what you can get at Publix or anywhere else. All right. But the rules still had to be followed, and they had to figure that out.
Cool. So one of the fun things about my job is I get to learn these new terms that I had really never heard of. And one I hear you guys use a lot is analog environments. So can you explain kind of what an analog environment means and how it relates to your research?
So analog environment means an analog for something else. And so when we think of analog environments, we think of environments that kind of look in some aspects like what you are trying to actually do. And so if you're going to, for instance, want to have a microgravity, a zero gravity experiment on the space station, one analog that we have used is, for instance, in the lower corner of the plane, you see an aircraft going up at about 45 degrees. That is one of NASA's zero gravity aircraft. It runs these big parabolas that, as it's going up over the sort of the top there, you get about 30 seconds of microgravity. And so we've done a lot of experiments in that aircraft as an analog to what you might find on the space station or back in the day in the shuttle, microgravity environment. The other kind of analogs then that we use for things that are like planetary analogs, we've used pressure chambers that reduce the pressure down that's close to the Mars atmospheric pressure. And we've also taken our science to remote places. Now, the environments in those remote places are not Mars-like from the perspective of the temperature or the atmosphere, but they are Mars-like in that there are some geological features that are mimicking Mars, and there are also features of just remoteness, uniqueness, isolation that also present the same kind of challenges and same kind of appreciations that if you were to take things on Mars.
So just to carry the analog discussion a little bit further, the notion of analog environments, especially when we're talking about things like an analog for Mars, just absolutely keep in mind that there's no way to create Mars on Earth, even though you will see that on the web. You can get close in various aspects. And what you see on the screen right now is from a northern analog environment on the largest uninhabited island in the world, and that is Devon Island. It's a northern polar desert. It's above the Arctic Circle. And there's a project that takes place there every year called the Hot and Mars Project. And what they do there is they use that island and that area to simulate a lot of things about being on Mars because, as Annalisa mentioned, it's remote. It's a polar desert. Nothing lives there, so it is a nice analog from the perspective of being a lonely, no biology environment. But the other thing that's very cool about that place is that it's the home of a very large impact crater. So it's one of the few places on Earth where you can go and live by an impact crater, walk around in the dirt created by a comet impact that made the crater, and ask yourselves what it would be like to live, work, and do experiments with your biology in a place that was a lot like Mars in that regard. And there, for example, is an outline of the crater. To the left is a lunar crater. To the right is the crater that still exists on Devon Island there. And as biologists working there, the notion that you can walk around and experience what it's like to be there, at least to some degree, in doing your experiments, is a real important part of the analog there.
Well, now that we understand analog environments a little, growing plants in Antarctica makes a little more sense. So can you tell us about what it is about Antarctica now that kind of makes it a good place to conduct the next stage of your research?
Well, we're going to have to run through some slides here, probably a little first. So one of the things that makes Antarctica a good place is that in addition to being very remote, in addition to being very cold, it also mimics the fact that anything that you take to Antarctica, you have to take as, it has to be pristinely handled. Much like we worry about planetary protection on the surface of Mars, we worry about continental protection on the continent of Antarctica. You have to be very respectful of the environment around you, sure that you don't contaminate it with what you bring in. And it is hard to get there. It takes a lot of resources to get there. It takes a lot of effort to make sure that you have everything in place before you arrive, because once you're there, you're isolated and you're done. So that is also another Mars-like or planetary-like analog.
And one of the other analogs that Antarctica presents in this particular context, I don't know how best to put it, is sort of a political analog as well. In order to go to Antarctica, in order to participate in this project, well, this project is a large multinational effort that we're going to show you. In other words, we couldn't do it on our own. No big space flight adventure anymore. Certainly we're not going to go to Mars as a single nation. It's going to be a multi-nation endeavor. The project that we participated in was largely European, but represented over 10 nations participating. The other thing about getting our stuff to Mars is that this particular project was called the Eden ISS, or is called the Eden ISS project. The tie there is between that greenhouse, the Eden greenhouse that we're going to show you, and the International Space Station. This particular analog was put together to ask the question, if you wanted to build a module about the size of a space station module and turn that into a life support endeavor, a life support thing, something that would grow plants and provide food for X amount of people over X amount of time, and you shipped it to a difficult place like the surface of Mars or the moon or Antarctica, you know, what's involved in doing all of that stuff? You have to have a ship to get it there. You have to have power when it gets there. All those kind of things take a scientist that normally works in a laboratory and puts them in an environment where they get to deal with all of those kinds of big ticket issues to get the work done.
Well, you had a lot of partners in this. the German Space Agency, the European Space Agency. Tell us a little bit how you connect it with them.
Well, actually, we connected with them initially through the Hot and Mars project. And so our work up in the crater that we showed just a moment ago was in collaboration with the Canadian Space Agency and also the University of Guelph and also NASA. But we met some of our colleagues there that were later also associated with the Eden ISS project. And so that's one of the things that connected us originally through that. We also were connected through some of our technologies that we have been perfecting for both use on the ISS and other places, and that's kind of how we got started in it.
Yeah, interestingly enough, one of the people that put the project together came through the University of Florida as a postdoc about a half a dozen years ago. And that sort of social connection also helped us be aware and become a part of this project. In the end, there are, as I mentioned, many nations involved, and Annalisa and I are the NASA-funded representatives of the United States to this particular project.
So because this project was at a German facility, you kind of had to take the long route to get there, right? And it sounds like, it kind of sounds like a logistical.
They essentially took a plane to Antarctica.
Now, one of the things that always sort of tickles us when we do these kinds of special. So imagine yourself going to the airport, in this case, the Cape Town airport, and you want to know where the flight to Antarctica is. Well, how do you think you find that out? You look up at the board, and there's right at the top, under the A's, it says Antarctica, gate 37. It turns out it's a charter flight, but those kinds of high-end charter flights, you check in, you give your baggage over, they X-ray it, the same kind of thing. You pick up your bag of your polar clothes, and then you go to the boarding gate, and you hang out there, and you wait and see is it going to be on time, or you're going to leave late. And they let you know, that kind of stuff. And the crew comes by and says, to the Antarctic flight. And you're going, are you kidding me? We're going to fly to Antarctica and it's in a regular old airplane?
Well, it wasn't in a regular old airplane, but that's kind of another story.
Yeah. That's kind of, so the first thing is a little bit of culture shock when you want to go to some place like that and you find you're just going to the airport, right? The cool thing is, of course, when you land. There's no airports in Antarctica. The only thing they do is they carve out down to the ice, down to the blue ice. They carve off the snow to the point where the airplane can land on a regular runway that is made out of ice instead of asphalt.
It doesn't go sliding all over the place when you land?
You know, we asked the pilots, how hard is it to land on ice? What special training do you need to do? And they go, oh, we'd love landing on ice. It's actually, because it's hard and because the snow that's there is so dry, it's actually way safer than landing on a wet tarmac runway. So they don't have any problem with it. So they just land a big 757 on the big blue ice runway, and you're there.
So first you went to a Russian base, right? And then I think you described that as the Atlanta of Antarctica.
Right, the Novo Air Base. You take a large plane into the Novo Air Base because that has one of these beautiful blue ice runways that the large planes can land on. And then from Novo, you take smaller transports to other bases. And so many of the bases that were in that area, there's a Japanese base, there's a British base, a Norwegian base. And so everybody comes through Novo, which is why it's like the Atlanta, and then you take smaller planes to the various other places.
Just so we have scale, you said it's like a 7-hour flight just from Cape Town to Novo, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
So basically flying over the Southern Ocean all that time.
Yep.
And then from there another 3 hours to the end destination, right?
Right.
Yeah,
That
that's
was a
about
smaller
right.
plane with everything packed in there with you.
Yeah, we've got some pictures to show a little bit about that when we get there.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get there.
All right.
So tell us about just kind of living and working, arriving and getting set up. I think one of the things you've said is that the like most common unit of construction in Antarctica are giant shipping containers, right?
So, yeah. So what you see there at the bottom is the greenhouse that we are going to be working at. And if you look at all closely at that, you'll see that it's basically the same kind of shipping container that's on any sort of ocean-going shipping ship, right, where they load containers. It's the same thing that goes on trains, same thing that goes on trucks around. It's the universal sort of building block of the global shipping economy nowadays. And it turns out that many of the things that are built in Antarctica now are built out of these things as Lego units, sort of. So what you see that in the bottom picture there is two shipping containers, two standard shipping containers that have been outfitted to become the greenhouse that we're working on.
And you said that's in addition to them being convenient, it's also because they have to be shipped there, right?
Exactly.
So we have actually some footage of the shipping container being shipped.
We're going to run this video here because it'll give you the sort of the first impression about what how things other than people at least arrive at in Antarctica. So this, as Joe mentioned, is the container itself, one of the two containers that make up the greenhouse, having its arrival on the ice. It had to come over not by plane, but by ship, of course. And there is one of the ubiquitous sort of snow-moving machines called a piston bully that is going to go now take this shipping container that has been built up as a greenhouse inside and is going to drag that up to where the ice station is, where we are living and working. As you can sort of tell, the ice shelf there is thick and safe. It takes a big icebreaker to get even close to the shore to do that. But that is the basic building block of not only the greenhouse that we lived in, but also the ice station that we lived in as well.
And you said that basically to have a base in Antarctica, you have to also have an icebreaker and a supply ship and stuff, right?
Yeah, especially, well, I don't know about especially, but in particular, the German Antarctic effort is relatively sort of new. They picked it back up again in the 1980s. So they have a sort of a wonderful new concept of how to live and work in Antarctica that's reflected not only in their ships, but also in the station, as we'll show you in just a minute. It's not a typical building. It's not a typical place that you might envision people living, but it is very much a modern approach to living and working in Antarctica. But just to sort of follow up, of all the European sort of non-American nations on that side of Antarctica, they have a very nice arrangement where they support each other through mutual flights and contracts. Whenever you fly in and out of the Russian base, for example, it doesn't matter what country you're from, you're always given food, you're given a place to sleep and all that kind of stuff. So it's a wonderful international cooperation among those
Kind of like the International Space Station.
yes, very good.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a good analog.
Yeah. So when you got there, you said that the base itself is kind of like a ship also, right?
Oh, yeah, very much so. And as Rob just said, it is just state-of-the-art compared to many of the other facilities down there. In fact, the pilots that come through will often mention, oh, yeah, we we love to be laid over in Neumayer because it's nice and it's clean and it's modern, and it is set up much like a ship. We often talk about in terms of Star Trek and things, and so there's definitely a 10 forward section where you have sort of a bar and you have pool table and comfy couches and all these big south-facing windows that allow you to see as much of the brightness and the sun and things. It's a very warm and welcoming environment where people get together. But then you also have the engine rooms, and you have the mess hall, and the dorm rooms and crew quarters, and so it really is very much like living in a ship.
So if you take a look at the video that's playing now, you got to ask yourself what's it doing up off the ground, for example, okay? Remember, this is sitting on a glacier. It's sitting on the ice shelf itself. There's no dirt anywhere down below. And that part of the ice shelf grows by meters every year in thickness. So if you put a building on the surface of the ice this year, next year it'll be half buried. In 3 years, it'll be completely buried. And the original, the predecessor to this station, after being there 30 years, was 30 meters under the ground, under what was then the surface. So what they've done, and what many of the countries have done, is put their stations up on stilts like this that allows the wind to blow snow all the way through it. So it doesn't accumulate nearly as much snow and therefore ice around it as it could in the past. If you can see this, what's going right down, that underneath that platform, however, is a basement. And in that basement are snowmobiles and all the other kinds of things it takes to move around. So what they do is they keep the basement a place for keeping stuff, all their equipment. They can seal them in there under bad weather, and then for the most part, the wind trickles through or blows through those pylons and moves snow left and right, fore and aft, but doesn't bother the ship at all.
It's a basement cut out of ice, though, right?
It's a basement cut out of the ice that's there, because remember, there's no dirt. It's just ice and snow there. And as you can see, as we're doing a flyby of the greenhouse there, there's nothing anywhere for. I mean, look at the horizon. There's nothing anywhere for miles, and miles, and more miles.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. Take a look around.
It was so clean.
Yeah.
It was so clean. It was amazing.
But there you have it. That's where we lived for a month, and that is our workplace. That's our home, and that's the mothership up there on the horizon. And so, getting back to the analogy here, this is our ship-like greenhouse that's basically a half-mile away from the mothership. It's powered by the mothership because they have a big extension cord that goes from the ice station to the greenhouse. But yeah, it's a lot like the kind of deployment strategy you might use for the ISS or for another planetary body.
So you'd have to walk out to to your greenhouse every day.
Or else take a snowmobile.
Okay.
I mean,
All right. Well,
sometimes you got to go in style.
still sounds pretty cold. How did you manage in that environment? What was the temperature? How were you geared up to live in that environment?
The temperatures were, it's the summer, so the temperatures weren't really bad. The temperatures were in the neighborhood of -10 to -20 Celsius. So it was not truly brutal. But when the wind would kick up and up to 40 knots or so while we were there, that makes it much more difficult. Mm-hmm. And then also when the winds are profoundly whipping the snow around, as Rob said, it's very dry and dusty, and so it occludes your vision. And you saw that sort of little rope fence between the main station and the greenhouse. That's to help you navigate when you have to get there. You can always walk along the and so you know where you are.
Mm-hmm. So Annalisa mentioned sometimes the wind kicks up. This will give you an impression of what a windier day or not a quite nice day would be there. And what you saw there, that container, all right, that's a shipping container, but it's a shipping container that has been turned into a library. So if you want to go to the library, you want to get away and go, go to a place that is a little quiet because the neighbors in the dorm rooms or stuff are making, you can walk out there, provided you have the right clothes, and go into a nice, quiet little library sitting on the ice.
We see, oh, sorry.
I was going to say, Rob said, provided we have the right clothes. That's another analog, is that, all right, you have to go to the greenhouse. I can't just say, oh, I'm just going to walk over to the greenhouse. No, I have to go down to the clothes changing airlock area and put on my big red suit and put on my boots and hat and everything, and then go out. And then the same thing happens at the greenhouse. You got to take off all that stuff in the sort of the airlock area, and then you go work in the greenhouse, and vice versa. So every time you go outside, it's like an EVA.
Kind of like putting on your spacesuit. Yeah. So when you get to the greenhouse, you're growing plants there. It's a analog environment, right? And tell us a little bit about that process and how that fit in with there's people there now, right?
So the process is, it's not your average kind of greenhouse, as in that you're not growing anything in dirt. You're growing things in what's called aeroponics. And so essentially the plants are grown in these trays that are sealed, and then the roots grow down into sort of this bottom area of the tray that receive a very fine mist of water that has a solution of nutrients and micronutrients that the plants need. And then the water is recycled and used over again inside the greenhouse. It's not a completely closed loop, but it's sort of semi-closed. And the plants are grown until they're of a harvestable age, and then they're taken to be eaten.
So the crew ate the 8 plants that you grew while you were there, or?
We only were doing test runs while we.
It's fun. I got to tell you, it's just plain fun. You're living in a place where there are 30 other people that sort of look and act every bit as nerdy as you do, right? They're interested in the same things. They all worked hard to get there. They're all having a good time. They all understand that this is science, so it's like going to camp. Everybody there is a little kid. I might have been the oldest guy there, but I was still a little kid. So just like little kids, we have our fun things we get to do and all that kind of stuff. 30 people, all healthy, no dirt, good food, and doing science all day, every day. The 30 people that were there, as the season ends in the summer, they have to start leaving. And we were lucky enough to see the first time that the sun dipped below the horizon. So when we got there, it was 24 hours of complete day. And it's day-night there now, but soon will be nothing but night for a long time. Those 30 people have now dwindled down to 9. And so there's now 9 people living in that mothership. And they will be there for a grand total of 14 months by the time their term of duty has expired. So they went there before the summer to learn from the last overwintering crew. So they were there. The new overwintering crew and the older overwintering crew were there together. So that's 18 of the people. And then another 20 people that were just like us, that were just there for the summer to be doing science, to be looking at the penguins, to be tagging penguins, to be counting the number of cosmic rays that hit, to be measuring the magnetic fields, to be understanding what happens to the snow that goes there, or to be trying to grow plants in a strange and interesting environment to feed people. But the long way around to your answer is, yep, they're eating the food.
And loving it.
I was going to say, and they've even said that it's so great to have like fresh, it's mostly like lettuce and stuff, right?
Yeah, mostly what they call high moisture volume crops, things that I know it's all technical, but because you think about it, when you go to Publix, right, you buy a bag of lettuce and you buy a bag of potatoes, the lettuce just does not last as long. And so it's very desirable to be able to have fresh greens.
But again, the analogy here is an incredibly good one. One of the funnest times that we had was when the supply ship came to the station, all right? The food had started running out, by the way, and we had gotten a little bit tired. Well, I shouldn't say that. They were wonderful people and great cooks and everything, but the meals got repetitive as the food started running out. Then the supply ship came, all right? Container after container of wonderful frozen stuff. And so what do? They take it downstairs in that basement where it's carved out of ice, and they put it in the freezer. So those people are just overjoyed at having a bunch of, nothing but frozen stuff to eat from now until forever. Of those 14 months, they're going to be there.
Except for your stuff.
Well, not our stuff, but the team stuff, the fresh stuff that brings to the table so many things that you guys do enjoy and don't always realize you enjoy, but that is certain kinds of fresh taste, the smells of fresh food, and the notion that that you are amongst another living thing.
So tell us a little bit about what you did when you weren't working. What were your favorite things to do, and how did that impact your kind of worldview of the science you're doing?
Well, we're also teaching this class, and we did a live lecture from the class, and that's one of the things that they asked, what do you guys do for fun? Well, mostly what we did for fun is we would go outside and just sit in unbelievable awe of the environment, and I'm not joking. That was every day almost. We would go down there with a couple of our friends from the group and just sit and watch the horizon and listen to the wind, and it was an extraordinary experience. We also read books and talked to people and things like that as well, but that was a big part of it.
I didn't read any books, by the way. The stuff that you get to do there, for the entire time we were there, it was never, ever, ever boring. Remember, you're talking to a couple of nerdy people that went to science camp for a month. So the first thing is that you get to do your funnest stuff anytime, all day. Second thing is there's always some activity going on there that is way beyond your sort of normal everyday experience. A plane would come in with people or bring another experiment in or something like that. The chance to go with the penguin and go sit amongst those creatures for a while. These are all things that just are so far beyond our normal existence that being there allowed us to experience, because again we were there. We studied penguins, but we're among people that did study penguins, for example.
Yeah, my roommate, for instance, was a penguin biologist, and it was fun to learn something different from her, just chatting with her in the evenings. And just like she found it fun to learn from me of things that I did. And that was another nice aspect of this is, we're all strangers, but absolutely, by the end of the month, we're all saying our goodbyes, very warmly, and we definitely were fortunate to connect with an extraordinary group of people, and that too is a real gift.
And that's an analog, because those Mars are going to be a group of people put together and who have to live together for months at a time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Been a couple of questions about sort of our clothes and how did we get around there. The institute that outfitted us, as you can see in this picture, outfitted everybody because all the outerwear looks exactly the same. Those big red coats as one of the main things. But this room it's called the drawing room, but it's akin to what everybody, at least up north, would be familiar with as far as your mud room, right? If you've lived up north at all, you know that when you come in the winter, you got to kick off your boots, you got to get the dirty stuff and put it on one side of the door, and then you go to another place your clean stuff is. That's not quite the case in Antarctica on an ice shelf like this. That's the mud room, and the floor is perfectly clean. Remember, there's not a speck of dirt within, 1,000 miles in any direction. There's no dirt. So what happens is no matter how much snow you have on, no matter what, you walk in there, you kick off your snow, take off your shoes, you pile them there, you put your coats up there, and in an hour everything's dry, right? There's no problem. Everything's dry because it's very cold and not humid there at all. And the other thing is that there's no dirt. So the worst that could happen is you might have wet socks for a couple of minutes, but then that's going to go away because everything's dry.
One of the things that kept coming up when we were talking throughout this process was a lot of references to science fiction. And I gather that you guys were inspired in some ways by science fiction, whether it was Star Trek or Star Wars or The Martian, kind of growing up, and even now as scientists. Is that something that inspires you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll take the first whack at that. The longer answer is that, sorry, but we're Star Trek fans. And there is a reason that the Star Trek Enterprise presents itself the way that it is. And we learned a lot about that when we visited the research ships that would come to the station. There's a reason why the bridge is up front and can have a good view. There's a reason why the engine room is in the back. There's a reason why there are protocols and all those kinds of things. The same is true at the ice station. You can see that even though it's a building up on stilts, as Annalisa said, the engine room was in the back. And in the engine room, there were 4 diesel engines that provided all the power and the heat for everything that went on there. They melted snow to make water, so they always had plenty of water. But they recycled the water like a ship does. They're very good stewards of their environment. The ship has a captain, it has a crew, it has a mess hall. All of those things are pretty similar to the vehicles that our science has taken us to. So the metaphor for Star Trek, and it comes from the whole idea of ships and their control, and that's what space flight is about. So they all mix together in our particular science and environment in a pretty, for us at least, a pretty cohesive worldview of what a cool thing is, a ship.
So another worldview that we grew up with is that, yeah, we both did read a lot of science fiction from the time we were old enough to read. And as a consequence, even though the science fiction that we read back when we were kids is quite different from what you can find on the shelves these days, we grew up with the notion that this is what the future's going to look like, and never thought for a second that we wouldn't be part of it in some manner or form. And so as we go out every day doing our science, we always had the worldview, the mental map that, yep, this is all part of it, and absolutely we want to be part of putting it forward.
You both said that if the opportunity presented itself, which it probably won't, but if it did, you wouldn't be averse to going to Mars.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, you wouldn't be?
Oh, no.
How many negatives are there in that?
Yeah, too many negatives, sorry.
It,
Would you go to Mars?
I would go to Mars.
In a heartbeat. Yes. Okay.
So the longer answer to that question is that we've been fortunate that our science takes us beyond the laboratory a fair bit, right? So all these analogs that we've been talking about, the ability to go on special flights, the ability to go to special places, the ability to work in strange and interesting environments, is a special treat for a scientist just to be able to do. The coolness factor to be able to go to a new place, to be able to go to a special laboratory, a national laboratory, in this case the space station. Like some of the other national labs that exist and other special places, those special laboratories that exist around the world, it's not that our brand of science or what we're doing is all that different from everybody else. It's just that In this particular instance, our laboratory was in a very special place. There are all sorts of other interesting laboratories in very special places that are deep underground, that are high on mountaintops, and that give scientists that work there the same sort of chance to have an awesome adventure with their science as we had here.
I love the story you told, that at one point you were in Antarctica and you were talking to mission controllers in Ohio. Was it in Ohio? Yeah. And they were talking to the space station. How was that triangle perceived?
It's actually more of a quadrangle, actually, because it's, yes, so we had an experiment that was running on the space station during that time that we had to help get the experiment organized, would tell the astronauts how to orient the object that we were working with and things. The people at Glenn Research Center in Ohio, that's where this particular microscope was, I guess you could call it, driven. And so that's where they put it on and get the X in the Y, where it is
The
goes.
microscope was on the space station.
The microscope's on the space station, yes, thank you very much, but it's driven from Ohio. The people in Ohio aren't allowed to talk to the astronauts. They have to talk to first the people at Huntsville, Alabama, who then talk to the astronauts. So it's astronauts talk to Huntsville, Huntsville talks to Ohio, we talk to Ohio. And so it's more like that. But sometimes we get to talk directly to Huntsville, but we're never allowed to talk to the astronauts directly.
We can hear them and they can ask us questions, but our response has to be sort of multi-layered.
But it seemed like you were saying that the mission controllers were as excited to be talking to you in Antarctica as they were to the people on the space station. And they were, the space station was actually probably quite a bit closer, right?
Yeah. The fun part about all this stuff is some of the interconnections that occur. But the ISS mission controllers talk to the space station every day, all right? And the people at Glenn Research Center who monitored the microscope we were using on the space station, they're digitally connected and talking to the space station people every day, all right? So to them, that's not a big deal. Talking to Antarctica was like a huge thing, right? And they go, holy cow, have you hugged a penguin? And, you know, these are people that work with the space station all day, every day. And they want to know whether we hugged penguins.
Yeah.
The answer to that is no. Nobody touches the penguins.
That's right. We want to make that clear.
But again, just to tug on the analog thing just a little bit, the Neumayer station has the bandwidth, internet bandwidth, about equivalent. Well, not too many people here would remember what a real dial-up modem was. All right, so like 0.5% of what you can get at home, internet speed-wise, is what that whole station gets down there. So when we were talking to the International Space Station and the people throughout NASA, we tied up the entire bandwidth of the whole station for a couple hours.
That must have made you very popular.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's interesting you say that. One of the things that also struck us is that everyone was so extraordinarily gracious and very supportive. And in fact, we were doing this Skype from 10 forward, and people, and this was reasonably early into our time here, and so we didn't know a lot of people yet, but they walked to the rec area room, and they're watching for a while. We have the Skype thing up on the huge big screen that they watch movies on and things, and people were interested and curious and very kind. So
yeah, they
yeah,
gave over their internet time to us without any qualms whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I see that our time is about up. So if anybody has any questions, I'm sure these guys would be happy to take a few, or if we have any from online or anywhere. Okay. Yes, sir.
So that's a fantastic presentation, and you answered lots of questions. But one of the things you didn't say about what you did there was train for the marathon, so that about 3 days, and the half marathon, so about 3 days after arriving in Gainesville, that Sunday, the first Sunday back, you both participated in the Gainesville event.
How did you do that down there?
It's all Rob's fault. But there was a track, kind of, that goes from so you saw that rope fence, right, that goes out to the greenhouse. It actually extends another 1.25 miles or so past that, which makes for about 1.6 miles out and then back to a facility that tests atmospheric conditions and things. And so we would put on our Gore-Tex jogging shoes and lighter weight outerwear clothing, and we would go back and forth.
So the notion of going running in Antarctica is, so here we are, we're in Florida, right? And we know this half marathon is something we want to do when we get back. Is it a stupid idea to go running in Antarctica? Are you kidding me? So, I went down to Lloyd Clark's and said, hey, can you tell me how to go running in Antarctica? And they go, huh? You want a what? And, it's like, it's so slippery, it's so hard, it's so stupid. Why would you do that? And the answer is, you can see that track there up on the screen. That's pretty well groomed. And so on the ice, there's the ice shelf is pretty hard ice, except for that top sort of 1.5 to 3 inches. And if it's groomed at all, it's a ski slope. And remember, this is dry snow. It's not that slushy stuff that we are normally used to running in if we run up north. This is hard, dusty snow that's like running basically on a little layer of sand on a nice, hard surface. So as long as it's a good day and you can see well, running out there was no harder than running up north. Well, yeah, a little bit. But
you
no,
could say possible. You did it, so that's cool.
And
right.
Believe me, we were not the only people doing this.
Yeah, that's true. We weren't. In fact, we were almost surprised to find that, like, oh, hey, Ralph, that's, he's out there before, and it's not uncommon way to get exercise. There's also people who had cross-country skis that would ski around a little bit. We essentially had free reign in a 1 kilometer radius. No. Oh, more than that. Was it 1 kilometer? Yeah.
1 mile radius.
1 mile radius, right. And so you were able to pretty much go anywhere you wanted without having to take a radio with you and stuff like that. If you went any farther away from the camp than that, you had to take different kinds of precautions and things. But
So if I may, I was really struck by the fact that we're here at the Graham Center, who Bob Graham was a very big champion of NASA and Florida, the United States, and this international connection and public service. So sometimes people ask, why should we be doing this type of research? And your response always inspires me. So maybe why should we be involved in thinking about going to Mars and doing those types of things? You might want to make, a comment on that. Particularly, from that point of view of, the Graham supported NASA and this idea of open thinking and increasing our knowledge base and stuff.
wow. Okay. So it's like we had a ringer in the audience, but but seriously, it's, boy, humans really are explorers, and for us humans, exploring Mars, exploring space, that's what's next for us. And there's a lot of things that has to go into the exploration equation. And clearly, when we leave Earth's orbit, we'll take plants with us, and we have to know how they can survive, how they can help us survive, and all the research that we do that goes into that is what helps us prepare for the opportunities that we hope that some way is presented to us.
And back to the why Antarctica in this context. Antarctica, for the longest time, was the last exploration frontier on Earth, at least on the surface of the Earth, and it has a grand history of just this kind of exploration. And to be a part of an international team that is there asking about space exploration problems in an exploration environment that is staffed by, visited by people that are passionate about exploration, puts us as UF scientists right back in the middle of that mix. right back in that middle of like Shackleton and the other people that went to Antarctica, like we're talking about having people go back to the moon and go back to Mars. This is the stuff of deep cycle human science and exploration all mixed together. So that's a long way around to your answer there, but that's where we are.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to end. I want to thank Rob and Annalisa for sharing their adventure with us. You can learn more about their adventure in the new Explore magazine. There's some in the back. It's also available online, explore.research.ufl.edu. So we look forward to seeing you again in the fall, right? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.